Well, I'm Alan Dale from Gale Force Winds, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here at the Association of Allied Health Professionals. And this is the We Are Here podcast, and these folks certainly are here. They're making healthcare in Newfoundland and Labrador so much more. It's so impressive to be in conversations with them. They all have the same goal, and that is to make sure patients get the best care possible. And I love meeting them one by one. And on that note, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
So my name's Megan. I'm the occupational therapist based in Clarenville. I work in mainly acute care, but I'm sometimes covering long-term care, those sorts of things.
Talk to me about what an occupational therapist is. If you were sitting down having supper with your Nan and she said, what exactly do you do? She wouldn't be satisfied with occupational therapists.
No, most people truly aren't. Usually I always have to ask when I'm doing an assessment if people even really know what I do.
Right.
It's really hard to quantify occupational therapy because we have such a broad spectrum of things that we can do. We're in peds, we're in acute care, we're in long-term care, we do like palliative care, we're in community. There's so many different places we can work. A lot of it is working with, a lot of people don't understand what occupational therapy is. So we're doing a lot of, helping you with your occupation. So we kind of define an occupation as kind of anything you're doing during your daily, day-to-day, living tasks. So it could be anywhere from toileting to, driving. There's so many different things that occupational therapists do. The main thing that I do in acute care a lot of the time is, discharge planning, trying to make people safe for when they go home. So trying to identify, what equipment might they need to help make their lives a little easier for the transition home after they've had, certain types of surgeries. Or, other kind of life events that, warrant needing some equipment or things like that. I'm helping them with their cognition. I'm helping them with their, some rehab, those sorts of things. There's a lot of things that occupational therapists can do. It's kind of hard to narrow it down to an elevator pitch, I'll say. It's really hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, it's a very broad profession for sure. Was it something that you always wanted to be?
I'll say not originally. Honestly, I think, originally I wanted to be a teacher, but then as I was doing career things in high school, occupational therapy was something I was a little bit drawn to. And then in my undergrad as a kinesiologist, I was like, is it going to be occupational therapy or physiotherapy? What am I going to do? And then as I worked for a year as a kinesiologist, I saw a lot of what physiotherapy was doing. I saw a lot of what occupational therapy were doing. And I felt way more drawn to the occupational therapy, like the holistic approach of kind of looking at everything and, seeing what we could change in an environment rather than how are we going to change the person to fit in this environment. Let's see what we can change in the environment. Is there anything that we can do differently to kind of help these people make their life a little easier? So I guess it was after my undergrad that I kind of fell more in love with occupational therapy and decided that was what I wanted to do.
All right. And you're in a rural setting. Yeah. Talk to me about how that might be different than in being in St. John's.
Rural setting, I think, there's a little bit, I'm kind of on my own. There's a little bit, I'll say, less support. There's not as many occupational therapists. Like in Clarenville, we have a community occupational therapist. We have a pediatrics occupational therapist. I'm the occupational therapist that does acute care. And then there's one other OT that kind of does a few different things. It's like long-term care, community. There's a few different things in their role. And that's like the extent of our OT in the area. So we have a lot less, I'll say, individuals that we can kind of bounce ideas off and things like that. So we're reaching out to, other places in rural. So there's oftentimes I'll get calls from OTs in Buren, or I'll reach out to the Bonavista OT, and we're trying to kind of help each other because we don't have the same, kind of that office space where we're sharing the office with a bunch of other people that are doing similar things to what you're doing in, say, Health Sciences or St. Clair's. So it's a lot less, I'll say, kind of support, but you work with your whole team of allied health. So we have a great physiotherapist. We have amazing social workers, our dietitians, our SLPs. We all get together and we chat about our clients, and we all kind of help each other out in the rural setting. It's a little bit more, I'll say, removed from all of those services that there's at St. John's, but, we're doing everything that we possibly can for our clients out in rural.
How long have you been doing it?
I've actually been doing it for 3 years.
Okay.
I actually moved out to rural in Clarenville. I believe it was February of 2022, and I've been there ever since.
Okay. So, in a big picture of a career, it's been a short journey so far,
Yep.
which is great for my next question. Right? And that is, where do you see the challenges in healthcare? Sort of someone looking at it, you've touched it now for 3 years. Where do you see some of the challenges?
I think some of the challenges are just like limited resources for all of allied health professionals. We have limited resources, especially even, further out in rural. I think, limited support. So, in town, there's, more assistance for different professions, where there's not as much allotment for, assistance out in rural. And that can be too just the fact that there, isn't the interest for those positions in those areas. But, I think we need to bring more positions out to rural locations because there's definitely a need for it. And I definitely think, the work is there. I just think, it's the support, more positions, more support staff, those sorts of things I think are definitely something that I'm hoping is going to be,
right.
Figured out in a few years, but who knows. Otherwise, I think that will probably be my biggest thing right now is just more staff.
As an occupational therapist, of course, you're tasked every day with finding solutions, solving problems. Every single day, that is your job. And I'd ask you to apply that same lens to the healthcare system. Where do you see the opportunities?
I guess, there's different opportunities, for us to advocate for different things. It's kind of hard to quantify, all of the things that might, work, because something that could work in rural in our hospital might not be the same issues that are going to work or solutions that are going to work in Buren or Bonavista or, out in Central or on the West Coast or up in Labrador, Grenville. So it's kind of hard, I think, to quantify like what is going to work and like put a blanket statement over, it's going to work for health sciences, so it'll work for GB Cross or it'll work for, James Payton and Gander, those sorts of things. I think it's a little hard to kind of quantify exactly what would be the solution to kind of some of the issues that we're having. But I definitely think, it's a conversation that we need to continue to have and kind of figure out a solution that's going to work for everybody.
Speaking of conversations you need to have and finding solutions for everybody, in the conference there's so many professionals at the table from so many different perspectives, so many lenses on the healthcare system. How has the conference been for you and what are you excited about it?
The conference, I think, has been interesting. Obviously, we have this every 2 years. I've only been working for 3 years, so this is my first conference. So I didn't really know what to expect coming into it. But I definitely think, everybody kind of putting their heads together, seeing the different perspectives from different professions, because, and I think occupational therapy is represented well here. But even hearing from like SLPs and like social workers, even though I hear from them on my team, hearing from other people working in other areas definitely helps kind of me understand the struggles that everybody else are going through and how it relates to my struggles that I'm having. And it's great too, like sometimes, we have questions and like, this is my answer, but then somebody says something completely different that I didn't even think of because it's something that they're kind of dealing with in their day-to-day. So I think like all of the different perspectives, all of the different opinions that come together, that is something that's really interesting and exciting. Just hearing different people's different ideas for, again, like solutions for things or like, what their main struggle is, those sorts of things, and just sharing in the camaraderie of, kind of all trying to figure out, what's our biggest issues and what do we want to address and those sorts of things.
As a young person starting your career in this profession, you are the solution, by the way. You are the solution to all of this. So I would ask you that, if you had an opportunity to stand before the decision makers, the policy makers for the healthcare system in Newfoundland and Labrador, what would you tell them? What would be just the one thing that you'd want them to understand?
I think the one thing I want them to understand is kind of what we do for the healthcare system, because a lot of the times it feels like, like we said at the beginning, not everybody knows what occupational therapy does. Not everybody knows what speech language pathology does. Not everybody knows what recreation therapy or even respiratory therapy. Nobody really knows kind of what everybody does. So I think I would start with kind of explaining all of our roles and how we contribute to the healthcare system. Because oftentimes it feels like we're a little bit overlooked. They're like, oh, you're all lumped together in one, it's allied health. But, understanding each of our roles and what we have and can offer and provide, I think that would be, I guess, the number one start. And then offering solutions is just, better workload management, more positions, like I said, to be able to support. We have sometimes 2-3 year wait lists that they're like, well, why is your wait list so long? And it's like, it's only me in this position, so I'm doing all that I can. And then, taking down the wait list. If we added another position, we could cut that wait list in half. Or if we added another 2 positions, we could, see people at, I'll say sensible times,
right,
rather than them saying, I was referred 2 years ago, and you're like, oh, you're getting close to the top of the wait list. So again, I think, solution is maybe adding a few more positions and, understanding and getting people to understand what we do as allied health.
An absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you. This is what the face of healthcare looks like in Newfoundland and Labrador. These folks surely are making a difference, and they are here.